So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we're going to be seeing a free-for-all on a map that was new for 0.97. I think I have shown this one before. It's a map that kind of goes a little bit strange when you look in certain directions. The trees sort of phase in and out of existence sometimes when you go to certain areas of the map, but I have shown this one before, I believe, once, and there was actually a battle that I played on this one quite some time ago as well when it was still being tested, where I got absolutely demolished by trying to charge uphill into a massive Mordor army. I do remember that. I believe it was J-Monster that finished me off. But this is going to be interesting because this is going to be a free-for-all, so there's going to be a lot of battles happening throughout the map. And it's also a rather unique setup for a free-for-all as well, because there are 4 teams, of course. 2 of the teams have got 2 players playing in them, and 2 of the teams just have the 1. So of course this means if you're in a team of 2, individually your armies are going to be smaller, but you will of course have the benefit of having 2 pairs of eyes guiding your army's efforts rather than just the 1. And I do feel as though the 2-player teams will have a slight edge in this case, because they can, if they do go quality or quantity heavy, they can really go into that and lean into that with 2 armies if they decide to coordinate in a way that teams of 1 can't. But we'll see how this goes, because it is a rather unique setup for a battle, to say the least. And this is also a map with a lot of terrain that's hidden under the canopy of the trees. The trees themselves make for very easy hiding. There's some open areas within the trees as well with the stones. Then of course there's the road in the middle, which of course movement speed is increased on roads. So it'll be interesting to see if anyone tries to take the centre. But without further ado, let's get on with the army compositions themselves. We'll start off with the player and the team who sent me the battle replay in today, and that was Agalar Galudithon, who's going to be playing as Numenor. We've seen quite a few replays of late where it's been from the perspective of a Numenor player, mostly from Sin of course, but Numenor is a popular faction for good reason. They have some very nice high quality units. They're a very pleasant faction to look at, which obviously style counts for a lot when people choose their favourites. And just in general, Numenor have got a lot of punch, especially when they're combined with Imladris. This is going to be a very potent team indeed with regards to their quality. A very scary force, especially with regards to their up close and personal infantry. It's going to be quite difficult for any team to match up with that, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But some Seafarers, very good supporting tool, especially considering their ally in Imladris. Javelins are one of the things they do lack. The Seafarers of course don't have a lot of ammunition, but what ammunition they do have is very, very deadly, with a missile value of 10. And of course when all is said and done, they can muck in melee without getting utterly destroyed as well. So a very good all-purpose unit this, good for supporting both the Numenorian army and the Imladris army they're marching alongside. Couple of units of Romena Nardukadar, and to be fair, again, this is a kind of unit that Imladris don't really have access to, an armour-piercing spear. Of course, Imladris certainly don't lack with regards to quality spears, but the Romena Nardukadar, when you compare them to something like the Eldarenway Spearmen, the Eldarenway Spearmen are of course the superior unit in all their stats pretty much, but the Romena Nardukadar do have that AP, so it does make them perhaps a little bit more, give them a little bit more utility against certain factions. So a good choice, I think. Covering for one another's weaknesses is always a good thing to do in a free-for-all, or just any team-based game like this in general. Belagire archers with the armour upgrade, very good in a skirmish fight, which, to be fair, of all the Elwood factions in Imladris are fairly okay in a skirmish fight anyway, albeit in a different way to what the Belagire archers sort of bring to the table, more in a sort of quality sense. But I suppose in this situation where they have to be very frugal with the amount of money that they've got, just going for a little bit in terms of the archer line is just fine. And to be honest with you, when it comes to Numenor and Imladris, I think they're much better off getting into a position and being aggressive from there rather than trying to sit off. I know that it's a free-for-all and avoiding a battle is generally how you win a free-for-all, but with their powers combined, I think Numenor and Imladris have got simply too much going forward for them to really benefit much from sitting back. Romena Boabrim, so another unit of archers, albeit again in a very different sense. AP, another tool that Imladris technically don't have. They do have Silverthorn arrows, but they don't have armour-piercing arrows. And again, a low amount of ammunition from the Boabrim, but if they do target the right unit, they're still going to be very, very deadly. And then of course, the Royal Legion of Armenelos, which again, weirdly enough, is a kind of unit that Imladris don't really have. A dedicated bodyguard unit that is sword and board, or weapon and board as it were. And the Royal Legion of Armenelos are one of the very best units in this class, simply because of the amount of them, 84 in the unit, whereas most units like this have to deal with sort of 60 to 64, and that extra 20 or so men in the unit makes a big difference when you're talking about multiple HP units. So they overshadow anything else that the Kingdom's men can offer. Certainly, you really have to look towards the dwarves and the elves before you start running into worthy opponents for the Royal Legion here. Speaking of which, Imladris certainly have plenty of units in this regard that they can bring to the table. Eldarenway archers and the God Helene with their armour upgrade as well. So the God Helene They are the Silverthorn arrow unit, so they'll be able to knock units over with each volley that they make, and of course very high missile stats. And they, to be fair, when it comes to being a sword and board infantry unit in melee, are very, very strong as well. Probably not, certainly not as strong as the Royal Legion actually, because they have even less men in the unit than a normal unit would have of this type. But also just the fact that they are first and foremost archers, the fact that they're a very strong unit of melee infantry as well is kind of a bonus. Whereas it's the Royal Legion's entire purpose of being. Elder Runway Archers, of course, really, really strong elven heavy archers. Very expensive as well, to be fair, and it'll be interesting to see if they pay off. We then have a lot of Imladris Guardians, so good to see a bit of line infantry, because obviously Numenor did dip more into their spears, the armour-piercing spears of the Nardukadar, so going for a little bit more in terms of line infantry should help offset that a lot. The upgraded Imladris Guardians, one of the finest units of line infantry in the game when it comes to their quality. There could be some hidden units around here as well, because they are in and amongst the trees. But one unit we can most definitely see are the Gwythi Rockdoor, which of course, having a mobile presence in a free-for-all like this is always very useful, and the Gwythi Rockdoor as an all-rounder are probably the strongest knights in the game, because they combine the armour that you would expect to see on something like the Knights of Numenor or the Carmel's Dragon Knights, with more mobility and damage that you would expect to see from the Horse Lords of Ulmo. They're not quite as good as those units in those aspects, but they're the best blend of all those strengths in my opinion. And there could be another few hidden units around here as well, but bear in mind Imladris of course are extremely expensive, so that may be the sum total of their army. Then we have Lord Whalecome, who's going to be playing as Lothlorien. He's on his own for this battle, so he's having to sort of build his army all on his lonesome, but as we've seen in 0.97 several times over, Lothlorien are a very effective faction indeed. And in this situation where they want to sit back first and foremost and sort of wait and see how the situation develops, as you want to do in a free-for-all, Lothlorien are very effective at that. So we have some Loren-armed Axemen, of course, a very effective unit of line infantry, maybe not quite as good all around as the Imladris Guardians we just saw, but they do have a slightly more aggressive edge with those axes that they wield. Then, the front line, we have Lothlorien Swordmasters and Loren-armed Spearmen, or Loren-armed Swordmasters as well, I should say. Heavy Elven Swordsmen, of course, once you get them into the melee, they're very difficult to kill one-on-one. The best way to deal with them generally is to shoot them and then try and swamp them, but of course you may not have that luxury, especially not in a situation like this. Swordmasters in general, heavy swordsmen are an interesting kind of unit. Like, there are situations in which they can do very well. They are pretty highly specialised troops, but generally speaking you do need to be very careful with them, because they could end up being a bit of a waste because of their vulnerability to arrows. So we'll see how they do in this situation. Obviously the Loren-armed Spears nowhere near as deadly against infantry. They do offer that anti-cavalry bonus, and also their holding power and their resilience, thanks to those big elven shields that they're wielding, is also significantly higher. I actually quite like the inclusion of a ballista here from Lothlorien, because it does mean that they can dictate the pace of certain engagements if they so choose. Obviously it's not really the most devastating piece of artillery, but just trying to force an engagement in your favour can be the difference between victory and defeat in a free-for-all like this. So just having this insurance policy I think is a good idea actually. More Spearmen and Swordmasters. Just in behind we do have some Spears of the Wood, which I think are just an auxiliary unit designed to protect the ballista. We have some Marchwarns of the Wood with their poison arrows. I don't know all of the factions that are involved today, but I'm not sure if there are any low morale factions. If there are, the poison arrows will have their effectiveness increased of course, but if they're not, you're quite unlikely to break factions like Numenor and Imladris easily, so we'll see how that goes. Loren-armed Archers, so some heavy elven archers for Lothlorien as well, which will be decent, pretty much the best thing Lothlorien have for a skirmish fight this, because while they're quite expensive and not ideal for that sort of situation against low tier archers, their armour, their damage, their accuracy altogether means that they can overpower most archers in a ranged fight like that, and obviously they're pretty good in melee as well, so even if you do have to dump their ammunition on lesser beings like that, you can still get some value after the fact in melee. Elder Council for some javelins and spear hybrids, and then finally over here Haldir is going to be riding with the Riders of the Golden Wood, which is a good choice in this situation as well. Always good to have mobility, like I said. They're very good in melee against other cavalry as well. Most specialised units of melee cavalry will defeat them, but any old rubbish won't be good enough to deal with the Riders of the Golden Wood by a long shot. But the main attraction of course is those Silverthorn arrows that they shoot from horseback, which can be a real pain if they're microed properly. But considering it's the only unit of cav he has, I think he should be able to manage that just fine. The other army who's on his own here in the south is going to be Blue Ranger, who's going to be playing as Cardolan today. He's got some Minhiriath archers at the front, so Cardolan are a low morale faction, so they're going to want to avoid the poison arrows, but Minhiriath archers are good in a skirmish fight, decently heavy armour with those plates and chainmail, and the shields they wear on their back, of course nowhere near as damaging as an elven archer, but last time we saw Cardolan in action in a free-for-all, they won. And the Minhiriath archers were a part of that, because they really did help wear down the defences of the other factions on display. We have some Minhiriath men-at-arms, which of course are sort of the bread and butter of a Cardolan army, very sort of basic human men-at-arms. This is kind of the very bog standard units that you expect from sort of the Western Kingdoms of Men. If you want a decent solid core to your army, you want these guys, because if they're up against units that are worse than themselves, militia, they'll very easily deal with them. If they're up against units that are better than them, they will at least hold out for a long enough period of time for other units to do the heavy lifting. And that's pretty much all you can ask from a unit that's sort of designed to be the standard up to which your army is measured. And obviously Cardolan's, in comparison to some of the other Western Kingdoms, the morale can be an issue, as it is with Cardolan's whole army, but the support that's around units like this for Cardolan is actually very effective. And speaking of which, the sharpshooters, the crossbows in general for Cardolan are one of the best, if not the best, supporting tool they have, because it makes life very difficult for enemies, whether they're trying to get cavalry around the back, whether they're trying to smash down the front line quickly and blobbing up too much as a result. Crossbows are very good at exploiting that sort of thing that the enemies are able to do. And of course the sharpshooters, not only are they good at that, but they're also mace men in melee, so when all is said and done, they do have a very useful function in melee as well, very capable of defending themselves. Difficult to skirmish with as well, because they've got similar armour and shield values to the Minhiriath archers in front of them, so they're kind of difficult to shoot and kill with anything other than better archers, to be honest. Speaking of which, Men-at-Arms Roman Gatekeepers, even better again, of course, the higher tier crossbows, Halberdiers in melee, and they're basically just the big brother in every respect. They don't have the armour upgrade here, so they're not as strong as maybe they could be, but it doesn't really matter too much, I don't think, in this situation. Greenway Garrison Footmen, so some cheap Cardolan pikes, another very useful tool they have for sort of making it very difficult to smash them down from the front. Some Dunedain Captains with the Cardolan tabards on their chests. Yeah, very, very good unit this. Obviously heavy swordsmen, bodyguard tier heavy swordsmen do tend to not suffer from the same problems as regular heavy swordsmen do, because they're much better as a supporting tool in and amongst your other units. But the Dunedain Captains are probably on the lower end of the spectrum for that. But they're still good. Like, they're still very good at what they do regardless. Warns of Tir Gorthab, probably the most commonplace morale booster that Cardolan have. They fight on the front line, boost the morale of nearby units, make them difficult, make them themselves and units around them much less likely to break it. So almost an invaluable tool really. As the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, they provide a very similar morale boost as well, although I think it's in a wider area. Again, almost a must bring in certain situations for Cardolan this. But you won't be sorry you did, because obviously they're very, very tough as well. Very heavily armoured, very heavily shielded. Spears as well, so even cavalry's not really going to want to charge into them. At the back, some Merc crossbows, which are going to be roaming around trying to use their surprisingly damaging crossbows. Like, these crossbows, it's a very interesting pattern they've got on them. I can't imagine that's intentional. It looks almost Aztec. But regardless, the crossbows are very damaging, but they have a very limited range in comparison to crossbows that are on foot. So have to be careful of that. Tharbad Warhammers, very high sort of armour piercing, shock infantry, multiple HP as well of course, and some more pikes on this side. So Cardolan definitely spread out a little bit over here. And then finally the other team of two, and it looks as though Cardolan is trying to wrap around them from behind. We have Pablo Escobar 9905, who's going to be playing as the Dwarves of Erebor, alongside King Ragnar, who's going to be playing as Mirkwood. So Erebor, of course, I think I've made my opinions on Erebor quite clear. I think they're quite an easy faction to play, to say the least. So we'll see how well Pablo is able to do here. Ironfoot Wargoats, again, good for a bit of mobility. But again, you do need to micro them properly, otherwise they will be subject to the same sort of problems as other cavalry of that type will be. A lot of Ironfoot Spears who are surprisingly strong, as we saw on a Mountain Pass battle not too long ago. The Ironfoot Spears can stand up to an awful lot of punishment and still emerge victorious, or at the very least hold out for such a long time that reinforcements will easily be able to make it to them. So a very reliable unit indeed. A high damage unit of Axguard of Erebor in behind them. We have a lot of Ironfoot warriors as well. Just the basic bread and butter of Erebor is really very, very solid. And obviously the supporting units that are around them, much like Cardolan, only, you know, with Erebor, I would say their mainline infantry is so much stronger than Cardolan's, in addition to having sort of arguably even better support as well. Axguard here again, but of course the main event's going to be the crossbows. So we've got some Ironfoot crossbows up on the hill. We have some Blacklock Engineers, obviously body piercing crossbows, pretty much the ultimate expression of terror in this game. It'll be interesting to see if they can be used effectively, because if they are, That drastically increases Erebor's chance of winning, but of course a smaller army because he has an ally. But Mirkwood are not the worst allies to have by any means. Spears of Emondwyr on the front line, so Ragnar clearly has decided to go for a little bit more in terms of numbers, which is not the worst thing, considering the fact that he's got an ally anyway. He's got some archers in front, which I'd imagine are probably Woodland Realm Patrol. We have some Blades of Emondwyr in behind them, so the Emondwyr units out in force, and while they may be certainly more basic than the heavier Hyr units that Mirkwood have available to them, this is still, by all means, a very fine unit. They will perform adequately enough against the foes that are against them, I think. And obviously the main event is going to happen elsewhere with crossbows and the like. Upgraded ERYN, so good to see them. Heavy Elven Swordsman once again. This though is, maybe it's not, maybe this is stuff like the Wardens of Amon Lank and maybe something like the Elves of the Elven King, because I don't see an awful lot else that could be taking up all of Mirkwood's funds, to be honest with you. But regardless, without further ado, let's begin. So, it's a deceptive map, this, because it looks kind of flat. When you look at it from on high like this, like you think, it's just a nice flat plain, there are trees that pop in and out all over the place. But it isn't. There are a lot of hills on this map, and if you can bait an engagement in the right place, you are onto a winner, I think. It will be interesting to see how the initial engagements go here, because obviously with the free-for-all, the key is to not be so reckless early on that you put yourself in a situation that you're clearly not going to win. I think Cardolan, I mean, their plans are clear and obvious. I think they're going to try and wrap around from the back over here, and considering how everyone is deployed, I think maybe they were expecting Erebor and Mirkwood to maybe be a little bit further back facing them, but considering they're not, they're probably going to try and wrap around and hit Erebor from the side. Some hidden Cardolan units have also revealed themselves. The ERYN Vorn Axemen, a very cheap unit of shock infantry to say the least, but should still be pretty decent against the dwarves as long as they're backed up properly. Any AP at all Cardolan will be very grateful for in melee. They obviously have plenty at range with their crossbows, but it's not quite so simple in melee for Cardolan. Support is going to be key here, but it's also going to be a fairly difficult task, I think, this for Cardolan, because you can see here with the hill, the way that it's shaped, all Erebor really needs to do is sort of tilt their army around to face Cardolan, and they have the high ground. Having said that, I mean, Cardolan, they can skirmish well enough with Erebor because they've got crossbows themselves, and I think actually based on numbers, they may have brought one more unit of crossbows than Erebor. Maybe Erebor have got another unit of Ironfoots hidden in the trees somewhere. That will be interesting to behold indeed, as Erebor, they're obviously going to see the danger that Cardolan represent. Numenor and Imladris going to group together as well, and actually it looks as though they're going to march down on this side of the road as well, so this spells trouble, to say the least, for the Ragnar-Pablo alliance. Yeah, I would say that they probably need to pull back, because I mean, just seeing the movement of all of the other armies, like I would imagine as well, seeing this Lothlorien, what they're probably going to do is start to creep their way forwards as well, which means all of the armies are converging on their initial position here. Mercenary crossmen are moving forward, so we will start to see the first engagements. Battlefield awareness is going to be key here. And there are black blocks. I mean, all it'll take is a couple of volleys from the Ironfoots and the black blocks, and those mercenary crossmen will be long gone. But battlefield awareness is important here, like I said, because it's more difficult to spot under trees, and even if you do spot them, it's not immediately obvious what they actually are. Mirkwood getting back into position as well. Ironfoot Wargoat still idle. Mirkwood have got their army pointing in the opposite direction to try and stop Numenor and Imladris should they get down here, but interestingly enough, it is looking as though Lothlorien are sort of moving at an angle, so they may be heading over here to try and deal with Imladris and Numenor, or at least do a bit of damage to them. And with something like the ballista, that is fairly likely, to be honest. Meanwhile, the only combat so far, if you can call it that, has been a couple of probing volleys from the mercenary crossbowmen. And like I said, I'm not really... It won't take too much for the mercenary crossbowmen to be dealt with, whether it's by Erebor's crossbows or Mirkwood's archers. It would be an easy enough task to deal with them, and it's very obvious where they are. There's nothing else to really keep tabs on at the moment. But having said that, mercenary crossmen creeping their way forwards, and I think clearly what they want to do is have a few volleys into the Ironfoot Wargoats, and they will succeed here. They are actually an unshielded unit as well. Armour doesn't really help too much against crossbow bolts either. Don't want to be cheaply losing this Ironfoot Wargoat unit here. And actually this is where the general is as well, and unfortunately for them the general is actually the one in full view of the Merc crossbows. But they are going to run away now, which is of course the wise thing to do. Withy Rockdor inching their way forwards. The calm before the storm this. I imagine with the way this battle's shaping up, considering it's not actually sort of devolving into two separate battles, at least not two separate battles on opposite ends of the field, I imagine this is going to be a quick and violent encounter when things start to move. All it'll take is for one of these armies to make the first move, and then the dominoes will quickly start to fall, I feel. We shall see. Yeah, the Woodland Realm Patrol are starting to shoot now, so this is going to be all that's really required. A couple of well-placed volleys, you can see. While they may have some armour plates on, the mercenary crossmen are not all that well armoured. Very, very vulnerable to arrow fire like that, which is obviously a big problem considering they don't have all that much range. And of course elves, higher damage, higher accuracy. Each volley is going to be that much more effective, and several of those mounted riders have already fallen. And so I think now, from Blue Ranger's perspective, he probably just needs to run off for a little bit and wait for later to use those Merc crossbows, because there's no doubting the fact that he's got plenty of crossbows here. But a decent position Erebor and Mirkwood have taken up, but on this hill they're probably going to start to feel the pressure start to come down upon them. This actually is kind of a useful feature, sort of zoom out far enough and you'll be able to see the entire army under the trees. But it'll be interesting to see what Lothlorien did. I think initially they were going to move forwards and maybe try to deal with Numenor and Imladris. But I think the further that Numenor and Imladris move, I think Lothlorien are going to start to reconsider, and yes, it does look as though they're going to start to move a little bit further in. That is the hill that everyone will be converging around. And this, if I were on the Dwarf and Mirkwood team, I would definitely be feeling a little bit worried at this point, because they've done the right thing by moving up onto this hill. Like, Cardolan and the Numenor and Imladris alliance immediately started moving towards them. So they need to sort of get into the most defensive position possible. But now that they're here, there really isn't any escape as such. Because, I mean, across the road, of course, is Lothlorien. So if you move that way, you're just going to get shredded by Lorien's archers and ballista. The map doesn't extend far enough this way to really get away all that easily. There's a very interesting patch of sand there for some reason, but no matter. But it is interesting, the tactics that it's Numenor and Imladris, it's their movement which has really given shape to this battle. Because I think Lothlorien was sort of preparing themselves for an engagement against Imladris and Numenor. But they are much more keen, it seems, on attacking Mirkwood. Which, I mean, to be fair, Hearthguard of Amon's still moving forward, is a good thing for Cardolan, I think. Because Cardolan, as soon as Numenor and Imladris start engaging on that side, they should be able to take advantage of this by also putting some pressure on. Meanwhile, Silverthorn arrows finding their marks, firing into the Gwythy Rockdor. That's interesting. It says the Gwythy Rockdor are hiding, but yet the Riders of the Goldenwood were still shooting at them. That's very strange indeed. I've never seen that before. Then again, I'm not entirely sure what M1 Breakout is doing. I think maybe he's trying to position his army over there, and he's lost micro somewhat on his Gwythy Rockdor, and it's going to be like shooting fish in a barrel for the Silverthorn arrows. Like, normally a unit of knights like this are going to be very, very resilient against arrow fire, but this isn't any old arrow fire. It's pretty much some of the finest ammunition that the elves have to offer. And yeah, that's not a good loss for Imladris, honestly. The Gwythy Rockdor is such an expensive unit, potentially so devastating, and each one of them that fell was one that frankly could have been avoided. Imladris staying in position so far. You can see here there's also been the beginnings of a skirmish fight over on this side. The Balagire archers moving forward. Armour upgraded as it is, the bucklers make them pretty good in this situation. Having said that, they are on the lower ground, and they are also trying to skirmish with elven archers as well. So Woodland Realm Patrol, what they lack in armour and a shield compared to the Balagire archers, they more than make up for in terms of damage and accuracy. They don't have the best arc of fire, to be honest with you, but that won't concern them too much. But they do need to be wise with how they choose to use their ammunition. Cardolan now moving forwards as well. I mean, Cardolan have to be careful as well, because they're going to have to deal primarily with Erebor, which of course means more in the way of crossbows, but I mean, it's not as if Cardolan are wanting in that department either. Balagire archers now starting to fire. And a nice downhill charge from the Ironfoot Wargoats here. I mean, if the Belagire... Yeah, the support is too far away, I think, from the Belagire Archers. I mean, I suppose the Seafarers could be in range, but... Yeah, I mean, the Ironfoot Wargoats, they're kind of lucky, I suppose, that the Wargoats are maybe not the swiftest unit of cavalry. Seafarers of Nindamos moving forwards a little bit, getting ready to potentially move in to reinforce, and obviously the Nardukadar as well, armour-piercing spears, the last thing that the dwarves want to have to deal with. The main body of the Numenor army is actually in range of the elves as well, but once again, nothing too dangerous in terms of damage done yet to either side. But like I said, I think positionally, Erebor and Mirkwood have definitely been dealt a bit of a rough hand here. More arrows being loosed. And they're doing the right thing because they're going after the more important units. They're not bothering with the unit of Belagire archers, who getting shot and absorbing punishment like that is pretty much their main reason for being. Seafarers of Nindamos, however, if you can take away some of the DPS that a unit like that is capable of doing, you're putting yourself into a good position, I think. What are Lothlorien doing? So Lothlorien are converging from this side. What was that? It sounded like the sound effect of javelins whistling through the air. That can't be right. Well, I mean, the Lothlorien archers are still back down here, so they're not too eager to move in just yet. They're sort of biding their time and waiting. As are Cardolan, to be fair. I mean, here the sharpshooters are moving forward now. Footmen also. I mean, to be fair, if you're dealing with Erebor crossbows, it doesn't really matter what kind of infantry you put in front, like pikes or heavy infantry will fall just the same. But the sharpshooters are moving forward now, and this is going to be a problem. I mean, they camped up on that hill, rightly so, considering the situation that they're in, Erebor and Mirkwood. But now they're going to have to deal with pressure coming in from the Cardolan crossbows, and this is going to put Erebor into a very awkward position, to say the least. Some really nasty damage is going to be done to some of this Erebor heavy infantry, and given the situation they're in, they can't afford to take too much of that kind of damage. Ironfoot crossbows opening up to try and respond in kind, but Cardolan, especially in this situation, are going to have far more in the way of disposable manpower than the dwarves are going to be able to muster. Now the ballistas coming in here as well. You have to feel somewhat for Erebor and Mirkwood in this situation. Marooned as they are, getting hit by pot shots on every side pretty much at this point. Eldarenway archers. That wasn't the Eldarenway archers. I think that was actually the god Helene, that. Based on the projectiles I saw whizzing through the air there. Yeah, it was. Doing a lot of damage there. And you can actually see as well Woodland Realm Axemen revealing themselves, so some more hidden infantry from Mirkwood, but I think this is I kind of like this decision from Mirkwood. I don't think it's going to work, but I like it. They see that they're trapped, they see that they're doomed, and so they're just going to charge into effectively the team that made this happen in the first place, that gave shape to this battle, and they're going to try and make sure that at least they don't win. Because Mirkwood is capable of inflicting some pretty deep wounds on these armies. The problem, of course, with doing this is they need to get into the Seafarers of Nindamos to stop them from firing. And this is the move which should start this battle off in earnest now. Blades of Emondwe are charging forward again. This is where the focus on slightly more numbers is going to actually hurt them, because the Blades of Emondwe are going to be destroyed by upgraded Imladris Guardians. The Roman and Nardukadar, the AP won't be all that useful, to be honest with you, but they will hold the line adequately enough for the archers in behind to do the damage, mostly from Imladris. You can see that Mirkwood did the right thing over here. They managed to get into the Seafarers of Nindamos and stop them from firing. Of course, with the support of the Royal Legion, this won't actually come to anything either, but I will give Mirkwood credit for this. I mean, like I said, I kind of doubt that it will work, but I like the sentiment behind it nonetheless. With the Realm Axemen charging in, unfortunately all the Romana units at the top of the hill have terrain advantage as well. Spears of Emondwe are moving forward, but the Gwythi Rockdor now are going to be very free to get some pretty nasty hammer and anvil strikes. So while they may have stopped the javelins from firing and doing really grievous damage in that way, they're going to suffer a fate that's just as bad, if not worse, because the knights are going to be able to charge in, and the morale shocks are going to be far too much for Mirkwood to bear. Again, like I said, it's been a pretty grisly assault, but the alternative was just sort of waiting there and dying slowly. Here Langman here, the Athmena arms are actually getting up on top of the hill as well. No, that's not it. I was just seeing past the other way. But Erebor over here, you can see now Cardolan are sort of slowly ambling into position as well. I mean, Cardolan are slowly but surely picking away at the Erebor position, which of course now don't have Mirkwood in behind them, so there's going to be plenty of... oof, and again, right down the line with the ballista from Lothlorien as well. It's been absolutely brutal for Erebor and Mirkwood this battle. In come the ERYN Axemen, of course, on their own. No match for Dwarven infantry. Simple lumbermen, no match for heavy Dwarven troops. But the AP will be useful, as provided they're backed up, they should still be cost effective in this situation. More Axemen coming in. Of course, they're taking damage from the crossbow bolts higher up the hill. Mirkwood men-at-arms are going to get charged downhill by the war goats. And that was an effective one. It looked like they were going to slow down at an ill-opportune time, but actually they managed to pick up to charge speed just in time once again to do critical damage really to those Mirkwood men-at-arms. And this is all going to be highly pleasing to Lothlorien, because they're going to have the healthiest army in the late game here, most certainly. ERYN fighting on the front line, still doing damage to the Seafarers, but they're going to get rear-charged now by the Royal Legion of Armenelos. Their fate now all but sealed. Well, it's got to be Mirkwood. Mirkwood's army being cleaned up. Again, yes, from an objective standpoint. There goes Thranduil, he was in there somewhere. Well, there isn't really a rest of the Mirkwood army at this point, but from an objective standpoint, of course, Mirkwood got slaughtered there, but given how the battle went, sometimes a heavy defeat is unavoidable. It was either going to be a slow, heavy defeat, or they could charge and do that, which I prefer the charge, honestly. At least it means that you get to die with weapon in hand rather than just oof. That there was the Blacklocks. Tharbad Warhammers managed to get in behind enemy lines, and now they're getting in over here. I mean, clearly the Blacklocks and the Ironfoot crossbows have been skirmished by the Cardolan skirmishers, and now being in melee with a unit like the Tharbad Warhammers is going to be very, very unhealthy for them indeed. But yeah, I think the dwarves are going to suffer much the same fate that their Mirkwood allies suffered, mainly because at this point, of course, they've been isolated and Cardolan's been able to get in and around them. The ballista fire that they've taken from Lothlorien certainly hasn't helped matters. It hasn't been critical, I don't think, but it hasn't helped. Over here, though, actually, Erebor doing very, very nicely. I think maybe this is because the crossbows have been focused on other things. Like, the crossbows have been trying to skirmish down with the Blacklocks, which is not necessarily the wrong thing to do. But that has left their front line somewhat wanting against the much more professional Dwarven troops. The Dwarven general is gone, however. You can see over here the Elder Council are also throwing their javelins in, but now the alliance of circumstance is clearly going to have to end at some point, and now Lothlorien and Cardolan crossing blades for the first time, and of course this is going to go heavily in favour of the elves, because it's just the ERYN Axemen they're having to deal with. Some Minotaur Roman gatekeepers in a very nice position as well. And of course the crossbows, Dunedain captains are on the front line as well. Oof, that's a big rout. Yeah, the ballista, that's one of the best things it can do, honestly, because obviously in terms of damage, it's not going to deal as much as the trebuchet or the catapult. But if you get a good hit, it's capable of doing just as much morale damage. And in this situation, that's been enough to completely rout the Dwarven forces. And that is going to be pretty much that, you would have to say. The final vestiges of the Dwarven army being wrapped up now. And sometimes that's the way, like, I'm actually in favour of this, because time and time again we see free-for-alls just devolve into two separate individual battles. This, though, is a free-for-all in the truest sense of the word, in that the way it fell, all of the factions were involved in the same battle to some extent or another. Gwythi Rockdor charging in over here against the Imladris Guardians. I'm not entirely sure what Cardolan were hoping to accomplish by sending a single unit of crossbows over here. They were always going to be isolated and destroyed by Imladris in melee and with their cavalry. What have we got here? I think the ballista's out of ammunition now, but it's already done its job. And Lothlorien are in a pretty comfortable position at this point, you would have to say. March Wardens of the Wood and Loren-armed archers will be able to shoot, although to be fair, Hearthguard of Amon Sul firing in here as well, going after the unshielded Loren-armed swordmasters. So maybe Lothlorien is in danger of getting a little bit too comfortable. And maybe Cardolan can sort of individually take out some of the more important units. Minotaur, Romen, Gatekeepers over here now joining what's left of the ERYN Vaughn Axemen in melee, and that will of course turn the fight back in favour of Cardolan. A much stronger melee unit than simple lumbermen is what the Elder Council now face. Over here, meanwhile, there are some Lothlorien troops that did make their way into melee as well. Loren-armed Axemen, but of course now they're being swallowed whole by the pretty much full contingent of Cardolan infantry, especially seeing as the captains and the Tharbad Warhammers are here. They're in the part of the map where Cardolan's infantry is at its very strongest, so it's not as if Lothlorien were entirely passive, which I do appreciate in that fight. But they do have by far and away the biggest army remaining on the field, or at least the least damaged army on the field. Although, having said that, I do have to say, Numenor and Imladris didn't actually take that much damage at the hands of the Mirkwood charge. So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I think Cardolan now that the dwarves have been pretty much entirely destroyed, I think it's going to be Cardolan that are now going to be feeling the wrath of these factions, because now, all of a sudden, they're the ones that find themselves in the position that's sort of surrounded. And I think Blue Ranger sees that because he's moving into a position where he's trying not to be caught between the two advancing armies. Unfortunately for him, though, he's having to leave certain troops behind, including units that he would really rather not, I'm sure, like Minotaur, Romen, Gatekeepers. Even if they're out of ammunition, they're still a very valuable unit to have in melee. Some more Cardolan forces coming down the hill, and at this point Cardolan are trying to sort of split their attention, which I don't think is necessarily the best idea, and leads me to believe they're probably not going to win this fight, but perhaps they could be the Kingmaker. Imladris Guardians, once again, finding themselves up against an opponent that they are far the superior of. More ERYN Vaughn Axemen who, to be fair, will have performed their duties admirably against the dwarves. Their AP in theory would be useful against Imladris as well, but the higher melee defense of Imladris makes it more difficult for them to even land a hit. Minhiriath Sharpshooters again, AP from their maces in theory, not the worst thing to have, but against Imladris you really need to have an army that's fully supported on every flank that you're attacking. And unfortunately for Cardolan, they don't really have the luxury of that. And as if that wasn't enough, there's also the small matter of all of these archers, God Helim and the Elder Enway, firing their arrows into Cardolan as well. And of course, against certain units like these very basic Greenway Garrison footmen, pretty much every hit is going to result in a kill, unfortunately for them. Seafarers of Nindamos now peeling off. Looks like they were going to try and go around, but they've sort of returned to the rest of their army now. But yeah, it's going to be brutal. Looking at the mini-map doesn't actually offer a great deal of information in a free-for-all like this, because there's just red triangles everywhere. You can see over here Cardolan still trying to hold the line, actually doing a better job over here against Lothlorien than they are against Numenor and Imladris, for the most part anyway, which is kind of surprising. I think that Lothlorien can afford to be fairly disappointed with how this fight has gone so far, because they had every advantage, and I think the issue that they're running into here, Karen Amroth Rangers and Galathran Blade Masters revealing themselves. Excuse me. Yeah, I think the issue that Lothlorien's running into here is they want to try and kill off Cardolan with as little amount committed as possible. Unfortunately, in so doing, it means that the fight on the front line is not overwhelmingly in their favour, which means Cardolan are actually succeeding in fighting them off. So Lothlorien would have been better off just charging everything in and swallowing this section of the Cardolan army whole, rather than just waiting and being more passive as they are now. They still have some ammunition which they're going to use now, but like, Lothlorien had that on a plate there, and they could have easily overwhelmed that force whilst maintaining some ammunition for the late game, where they're inevitably going to need to use some against the combined force of Imladris and Numenor. As it is, I think Imladris and Numenor put themselves into a very good position to go on to win this match now, because much in the same way as Mirkwood, Cardolan have been, for the most part, fairly easily dealt with, it must be said. There are a few units here and there still, like the Warns of Tyr and Gorthab, but unfortunately Cardolan, much like the forces up on the hill over here, victims of circumstance really, because they found themselves caught between Numenor and Imladris and Lothlorien from the other side, and they were already engaged in some places, so they had to make a decision, and they did about as well as they could have done, to be honest with you. The only player so far who I would say has probably had a choice in how they've engaged and has probably made some mistakes would probably be Lothlorien, interestingly enough, because I think the way that Numenor and Imladris have approached this battle just their movement alone has dictated things, and they've been able to use that to their advantage very, very nicely so far. And going into the late game, I think they're going to be in a pretty good place. Cardolan still have a few units left alive. And you can see actually Cardolan, Blue Ranger, trying to sort of recycle, so he's going to put himself over on this side of the road and say, alright Lothlorien, you want to hide behind me as Numenor and Imladris march forward, I'm going to do the same to you now. I'm going to try and... So what Cardolan are going to try and do here obviously is peel off some of these units over here. I would just leave them over here for the time being, and then allow Lothlorien to face off against Numenor and Imladris. And then try and take on the winner. We shall see who proves to be stronger. Caryn Amroth Rangers are a big unit to have in the late game as well, though body-piercing projectiles are always going to be a problem for whomever they go up against. These Cardolan pikemen are actually doing very, very well against the combination of Elder Council and Marchwarns of the Wood. But they are wavering now. I mean, the presence of the Gwaithly Rhokdor just in behind them probably isn't helping matters at all. Just goes to show, though, basic pikes, even against pretty decent units like the Elder Council, if their formation isn't being threatened, they can still put up a fight. What are Cardolan doing here, I wonder? It may be that Cardolan is actually trying to... Maybe Cardolan and... Nope, Cardolan and Lothlorien have not reached an accord. I was wondering maybe if they were going to put their differences aside to face off against Numenor and Imladris, but it feels as though emotion has got the better of these players at this point. Maybe Cardolan especially, as he's just kamikazeing into Lothlorien, which I feel as though the only thing this is going to accomplish in the end is take away enough of Lothlorien's strength to secure a victory for Numenor and Imladris. But it's neat to see these kinds of dynamics play out in a free-for-all. ERYN Vaughn Axemen charging in to try and help out the Tharbad Warhammers, but the Sword Masters are not to be taken lightly, especially not against already depleted units, and the ERYN Vaughn Axemen rout almost immediately as a result of charging in there. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. More Cardolan forces now arriving. Still the small matter of those Hearthguard of Amon Sul shooting into the Lorinand archers. Forward, well I say forward, back go the Lorinand spears. They're trying to regroup the rest of their army. But Numenor and Imladris marching over the hill that Erebor and Mirkwood temporarily occupied. But the Seafarers are now going to be throwing their javelins in. They're taking damage here from the Lothlorien archers pretty savagely, I must say. But having said that, these javelins were still finding their mark. And the Lorinand spears a little bit depleted. Those Lorinand archers also taking their toll. And this, I think, is Lothlorien's main hope. The Caryn Amroth Rangers. If the engagement happens over here, down this line, which is clearly what Lothlorien are trying to set up here, then those arrows could be absolutely key. But I mean, Numenor are going to see them and they're going to try and make a beeline with at least one of their units. Belagair archers, alongside the Boabarim over here, getting charged down by the Riders of the Goldenwood. So that's, you know, well shut down. If the Boabarim did still have a bit of ammunition, they could have been fairly key in the late game as well. But the Riders of the Goldenwood charging in there, using those curved elven blades to good effect. Meanwhile, Imladris Guardians taking point here, charging into the Lorinand spearmen. Again, this is where Imladris, in spite of how good Lothlorien can be at dealing damage, when it comes to just pure melee might among the elves, there's no real doubting that Imladris are the kings. And over here, of course, just helping compound matters is the fact that Cardolan are taking away some of Lothlorien's ability to respond to this. Warns of Tir Gorthad, obviously they're going to be killed eventually, but they're distracting these Lothlorien troops that would have been so useful. That would have been Haldir. I think he must have charged into Ramen and Nardukadar. That's what it looked like anyway. Some Spears of Rivendell with the armour upgrade in here again. Not a unit I'm a massive fan of personally, but I mean at this point just having their presence on the front line will back up the Imladris Guardians sufficiently enough, I would think, to allow Imladris to keep their melee advantage. The Seafarers are moving in. The Royal Legion of Armanelos also just butchering these Lorinand spears. And then of course the flanking move of the Nardukadar coming up here. They charged into the Caryn Amroth Rangers, and did the Rangers manage to get away? I think they did. Yes, they did. So at least they still have them. covering that retreat with the Galatharan Blade Masters, which, to be fair, very lightly armoured, not the best target for the Romen and Nardukadar. But, having said that, still a lot of seafarers using those javelins. Lothlorien are going to have to try and kite backwards here, but the problem they have with doing that is Imladris still have their own archers which they can use, like Eldarenway archers as well, are stronger than Lorinand archers in this sort of warfare. The God Helheim, I think they're out of ammunition at this point. They've been firing their ammo for quite some time after all, poking through the trees here, and you can see now what's left of the Lothlorien army over here has been surrounded, but they have managed to deal with Cardolan at long last, so the Spears of the Wood and the Lorinand Swordmasters are now coming back to try and salvage the situation over here. But I mean, Spears of the Wood, in terms of pure infantry units, are probably the weakest in terms of killing power that Lothlorien have to offer, so maybe not the heroes they were hoping for. The Swordmasters are a different matter, of course. They will be very welcome on the front line at this point. Another unit of Nardukadar heading around here, but the Galatharan Blade Masters have done very, very nicely, and to be fair, with the arrow fire, maybe I did misjudge. Maybe Lothlorien are going to have too much here. I mean, the problem is, like, units like this, like the Royal Legion of Armanelos, the God Helheim, they're going to be very difficult to kill when they get into isolated fights like this. And like the Lorinand archers are going to do their best here, but all they're really going to do is be a bit of a speed bump for the Royal Legion. There's also a few seafarers in here to give it a little bit of a hand. But yeah, definitely one of the scarier units of line infantry in the game, the Royal Legion. Not just any old rubbish is going to be enough to kill them off. The God Helheim are still fighting hard in here as well. I'm not sure whether those reinforcements are going to be enough to save the day for Lothlorien, as I said, but we will soon find out. Seafarers of Nindamos. 13 of them remaining. I mean, to be fair, the Seafarers, from what we've seen, I'm sure that they've got a few volleys off which were effective, but for the most part, just their presence on the field today has been enough, I think. I don't necessarily think it's been the damage their javelins do, but the fact that you have to respond to them in some way has made life quite difficult, I think. Obviously, they would have helped more so against Mirkwood with their javelins, but here in the late game, just their presence has forced Lothlorien to contort themselves into certain shapes, and that hasn't helped out at all. Minotaur Roman Guardians. I mean, this is going to be the end of the Gwaithie Rockdoor, you would think. I mean, they took a lot of damage early on, unnecessarily perhaps, but I think this is probably going to be the end. No, they're going to be able to get away. That does surprise me, to be honest, but Cardolan are coming in. Their final gambit. Eldarenway archers, yeah. Lothlorien are going to be defeated here. The Galatharan Blade Masters have done very well, but nearby, they're at Eldarenway. They're a Royal Legion. That is going to be far too much for Lothlorien to have to deal with. Lothlorien and Cardolan are going to have to put their differences aside if they want to have any chance of winning at all. And even then, it might not be enough at this point. Both sides have taken so much damage that the situation may be beyond them at this stage. In comes the Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers. Going to try and get those halberds down, but the God Helheim are going to charge in and respond, and they're going to get in and amongst the Minotaur Roman Gatekeepers, so the Phalanx won't help them. Halberdiers are still effective in just pure melee as well, but I mean, the God Helheim are a unit of such quality that I don't think this is going to be enough for Cardolan. And technically speaking, the final death blow to all of their opponents will have been dealt by Numenor and Imladris. So almost a complete victory, you could say. Karen Amroth Rangers out of ammunition, charging into melee. They're actually very accomplished in melee because, of course, they've got that two-handed blade. Most Rangers have to just deal with a side sword, or if they're lucky, two swords. And, of course, having a big two-hander is much better from a mechanical perspective. But it's not going to go too well for them here. Like, they're good, but they're nowhere near as good as the Royal Legion, backed up by Eldarenway. Now then, the real question is who falls first. I think it will be Lothlorien, you know, because I mean the addition of the Hearthguard of Amon Sul over here, they may not be the best elite unit for dealing damage, but they're very, very difficult to kill off quickly. And overall, you know, Cardolan, well, no, I think God Helheim 39, yeah, a bit of support. I think Imladris should still win over here, but it will be quite a narrow victory, actually.
Our men have fought long and are becoming tired.
Still another rock door. Lothlorien Blade Masters, again, they may have done very well against Ramen and Nardukadar, but now they're up against a very different prospect. Victory almost a certainty. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. You know, it is close, this one. Like, Numenor and Imladris are not going to have all that much left, but I would suggest that they should still win this. And it's a shame, really, because if, like I said, if Cardolan and Lothlorien had been able to put their differences aside for just 1 second, then in all likelihood, they would have been able to combine their forces to defeat Numenor and Imladris, but as it is, they are going to be victorious here, I would think. The Royal Legion are just going to have too much for the Cairn Amroth Rangers. There's also the matter of this one knight who keeps charging in. He's not actually getting any kills, mind you. He's just proving to be an annoyance more than anything else, but there is, of course, a lot of Elder Runway archers as well. Defeat seems certain for the Hearthguard. Yeah, the quality of the God Halim is shining through now. So close but no cigar for Cardolan, unfortunately. The last free-for-all that we saw, they managed to beat the odds and win the Numenorian Civil War. On this occasion, though, Numenor have gone to get Imladris' assistance, and this time, categoric victory for them. It is mostly Imladris that are left alive as well, which is interesting. Numenor, of course, to be fair, they were mostly made up of stuff like, they had 3 units of Seafarers, 1 unit of Balagar Archers, a couple units of Spears. Like, for the most part, it was very clear, I think, that Imladris were like the core of the army and Numenor were the support. And I think it's quite interesting that the support have been the ones to take the brunt of the damage for the Numenor and Imladris alliance, and Imladris have sort of weathered the storm a little bit better. To be fair, there's not very many of the Imladris Guardians left, which would have been sort of the heart and soul of the army for the longest time, alongside the Royal Legion. Still, that's just the way it goes sometimes. The Javelins would have been a real lightning rod for a lot of attention as well, I think, which is part of the reason why Numenor would have taken more losses at this stage than Imladris. Hearthguard of Amonsal certainly cementing their reputation as being a very tough unit to finish off. They're inevitably going to lose this fight, but they are withstanding an awful lot of punishment, to be sure. Still, of course, the Minotaur Roman Guardians who are back here. They're trying to focus on the Hearthguard, which I can understand. Meanwhile, yeah, the Rangers, like, they're good in melee, these Rangers, but like I said, going up against a unit like the Royal Legion of Armenelos is a completely different proposition. The Rangers are now starting to rout. I think he's the only one, actually, that managed to get away. Nope, he's got like 1 dude with him, so they're going to live to see another day. The rest of the Elven army is not going to be quite so fortunate. They're getting shanked, left, right and centre. So yeah, in the end, a very interesting battle actually this was. This was like a sort of a true free-for-all in many ways. You got a feel for Mirkwood and Erebor, like through sheer circumstance, basically through the choice of Imladris and Numenor to move around this way. They were doomed. Like there was no way they could have won. I respect the fact that Mirkwood, rather than just sort of sitting there and sort of letting their army bleed slowly, they decided to just charge down the hill and at least take an active role. Of course, they ended up dying pretty hard, but sometimes that's just the way it goes. Sometimes you just got to make a choice when both choices are not desirable. And now just this, the Cardolan general, standing alone amid a sea of hostile elves. God Halim are fighting over here. There's still the matter of these Minotaur Roman Guardians as well. Certainly an interesting fight, though. And I think it's a well-deserved victory as well for the Numenor-Imladris alliance. 2 of people's favourite factions. Certainly Imladris, they're always going to be a favourite. Their looks more than anything else earn them a lot of fans. Look at this, the Cardolan general still fighting hard, but his fate is sealed. He's fortunate, I guess, that he's in the middle of Spears of Rivendell, killing him off eventually, but that took them quite a while. And there we go. A very small army left alive, but Numenor and Imladris in the end deserved victors, and again they dictated the battle by their movements, and I'm not sure whether it was intentional or not, but the angle which they chose to approach from effectively meant that first of all Mirkwood and Erebor were caught in the middle, and then Cardolan were caught in the middle, and then finally, of course, it was just a straight fight between themselves and Mirkwood, and they didn't have to worry about themselves getting hit from a different angle. So again, I don't know if that was intentional from Numenor and Imladris, but I'll give them the credit because they chose to engage from that side, and as a result, they were always hammer and anviling one of the other teams with another team helping them out from the other side. So through planning and circumstance, I would say, Numenor and Imladris approached this battle in exactly the right way. Mirkwood obviously had a really torrid time of it, only 362 kills, but like I said, themselves and Erebor, they were caught in a situation that there was really no escape from. Like, they really were doomed, and you got to give some credit for at least standing, and they did at least pick the best place to make a final stand on that hill, but ultimately when they were caught between three of them, it was a real bully circle and they were being passed around. Cardolan, again, through sheer circumstance, they started off very well. They did well against Erebor, I thought, but then they were kind of engaged on one side by Lothlorien. They had to deal with a rapidly advancing Numenor and Imladris from the other side, and Blue Ranger kind of did the best he could. I feel as though the one mistake he did make was attacking Lothlorien from the side. Like, that sort of secured both their fates essentially, and gave the battle to Numenor and Imladris. If they had been willing to assist one another, then it would have been one of them who would go on to win. And Cardolan could have positioned himself such that the bulk of the damage would have been done to Lothlorien, and then he could have gone on to win the battle. But he wanted to take a bit of revenge on Lothlorien, I think, for sort of pulling his army into two halves when Numenor and Imladris were advancing. And as a result, he did end up effectively ending Lothlorien's chances, but he ended his own as well. Lothlorien, I think, like I said, I feel as though if they wanted to finish off Cardolan more efficiently, they could have. But yeah, like it's going to be. There's some shouting going on in the background. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, anyway, the Lothlorien player, like I said, if he wanted to finish off Cardolan, he should have gone forward with everything and tried to swallow them whole. As it was, he left too much in reserve, anticipating the late game fight with Numenor and Imladris, and as a result, he didn't really have the full army he needed to actually fight them in the late game. He was kind of caught in two minds, and then in the end he ended up sort of satisfying neither of his requirements. He neither completely destroyed Cardolan, nor did he leave enough in reserve to face Numenor and Imladris. But Numenor and Imladris played this battle very well, and I think they did deserve the win in the end. So let's see what did the damage for this team, or for Numenor at the very least. 265 kills on the Royal Legion, obviously a small army because split in half the funds basically. Seafarers, like I said, not a great deal of damage, which does suggest they didn't do much damage with their javelins, because if they run at peak efficiency with their javelins, they can easily break 100 kills. And in the end, they were more. Their presence, more than anything, like I said, was more of a problem. Remen and Ardukadar did okay, especially early on, but then they got killed off by Lothlorien. But yeah, Royal Legion, definitely the MVPs. And if you don't have a unit strong enough, or a series of units strong enough to kill the Royal Legion, or any elite unit like that in general, that's the sort of thing it can do. It can just prove to be just an insurmountable obstacle by the late game. So yeah, big thank you to Aglar for sending this one in. Definitely a very interesting free-for-all on an interesting map. I always quite like maps that are deceptively interesting like this, because obviously on the face of it this is just a more open field, sort of a green square, but it's not. There's a lot of trees, a lot of hills, the road in the middle, and it is interesting, like we said, and obviously in a free-for-all like this. I'm very glad that this one wasn't just two separate battles that then converge into a single battle at the end, because that's how most free-for-alls do tend to go. In this case, however, definitely more dynamic, and I think the blue team here, Numenor and Imladris, were definitely mostly to thank for that because of how they decided to approach the battle. But yeah, so big thank you to Aglar for sending this one in. Big thanks to all the players for taking part in a very interesting fight. I'm not sure, like, this is a battle, today I wasn't actually sure I was going to be able to record at all, which is why I decided to go for one of these sort of shorter battles. I do have a couple of sieges. I do have another battle from Sin as well on a new map, which I'm going to be showing fairly soon, but again it's a fairly long one, so I think I'm going to need to wait until I have sort of a sufficient slot in order to record that, which can vary pretty wildly, like I said. So it's going to be interesting. Like, again, I think it will probably be another larger battle next time. I think, based on how the timetable's going to fall, I will have a slot where I can record quite comfortably, but we'll just have to wait and see. Regardless, like I said, I think the going forward, like new stuff, there's obviously Bannerlord that's on the horizon, which I mentioned at the end of the last video, but like I said, across all of the end video cards in sort of the last week or so, I think like if something sort of brand new is going to come, I will sort of convey that in a channel update. I won't wedge it at the end of one of these videos, but it is at least good to sort of mention where I'm at with regards to sort of deciding on new stuff to sort of start adding in, and I think Bannerlord is probably a good place to start. But we'll see. Again, there are layers to this, and sort of sometimes I think being spontaneous is probably the best thing, and not trying to plan too far in advance, because based on my timetable, plans will be somewhat fragile things, and I may not be able to stick to certain sort of targets that I set for myself with regards to this. So I think it would probably be best if I am just a little bit more spontaneous. Bannerlord is probably a fairly safe bet that there will be some of that happening when it does come out. But yeah, regardless, that's something that can wait for a channel update video. And I do hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.